Hey, it's Courtney Barriger, your host of Environmental Style Now, the A to Z podcast on all that is sustainable fashion. And now, this might sound a little bit different in this episode, and that's because I'm not in my studio anymore. I have given up my home and I'm living on the road in an Airstream. So, cheers to change, cheers to 2021, and all of the adventures ahead. In this episode of ES Now, we sit with Manpreet Kalra to find out why we need to decolonize storytelling and the ethical marketing landscape. Hello, I'm Courtney Barriger, and this is ES Now. We're back from taking a month off for spring break, and we're just sitting down with Manpreet Kalra, founder of The Art of Citizenry. Manpreet works with ethical brands globally and impact counseling to help them craft anti-racist brand narratives. Now, she focuses on incorporating cultural humility into brand narratives and is particularly interested in how businesses in the global north communicate impact about their work with producer groups in the global south. Let's jump right in.
Why don't you give me a little bit of background as to how you got started? Eventually, I want to hear about the Art of Citizenry and what everything is with that as well. But I'm very curious about your coaching, your business coaching, and your advocating for a quality business model.
Yeah, so my work really started, I would say, it's been a few years now. My background's in venture capital and startups. And so I'm originally from the Bay Area, worked in the venture space, moved up to Seattle, and my expertise has always lied in marketing and marketing strategy. And at some point I decided, one of the things that has always driven me is advocacy and activism and thinking about equity across different systems. And so about 2 years into moving up to Seattle, I decided that it was time to use the skills that I had worked really hard on cultivating and really see how I can use them to support initiatives that are really challenging the status quo and trying to do things better. And so at this point, I became really interested. I'm a systems thinker, and I became really interested in understanding supply chains and especially manufacturing when you are working with communities abroad. And so I ended up traveling to India and spending 2 months there just learning about supply chains from the ground up. And while I was there, I recognized a few points around how we in the global north tend to approach ethical, sustainable business models. And it's very much from this place of assuming that we all have it really figured out and people in the global south just don't, and they need us. And that's incredibly problematic because it speaks to really deep-seated power structures that inform how we navigate and operate inequities. And so while I was in India, I ended up really questioning why I felt that I, despite speaking the same language as some of the people I met, despite looking similar to the people I met, felt that for some reason I was the one who could come in and try to create these more equitable systems. I had no experience doing that. But you hear these entrepreneurial stories in the social impact space, and that's exactly what people do. We feel this urge to do good in the world. And then we decide that instead of looking at issues close to home, we have to go abroad and solve those problems because somehow those seem so much easier to solve than the ones close to home. And that's really false because we have absolutely no understanding of communities and how they operate when you don't live in them, when you don't have those lived experiences. Even I don't have those lived experiences. And I would say that, my proximity to closeness is much more than many of other entrepreneurs in the space. And so it was a really interesting experience for me. And so when I came back, I ended up, getting really involved within the fair trade sector. I started off with launching Art of Citizenry, which was designed to help and is designed to help businesses really incorporate more responsible digital marketing strategies into developing stronger bonds with their customers. And one of the issues I saw right off the bat when I started Art of Citizenry is that the way many ethical, sustainable, fair trade, whatever you want to call it, impact-driven businesses have come to think about marketing and branding is really from a colonialist mindset. And it's just the way the nonprofit sector, the impact sector has evolved over the years. And so for me, my goal was, after starting to really hear a lot of these narratives, it really made me uncomfortable because it really touched upon an issue of racism that we do not talk about. And so Art of Citizenry evolved from working purely on just marketing strategy to helping brands really rethink how they approach impact and how they communicate impact through their brand marketing. And so that's what Art of Citizenry is. It's been, for me, I believe education is just such an important and valuable tool. And so I try to incorporate education into everything I do because I think that's the only way you can make sustainable impact is if you not just do these one-off projects with people, but you actually give them the tools to be able to unlearn and relearn and rebuild.
Amazing. Is there a certain formula that you use with every brand, or does it really depend on who the brand is to begin with?
Yeah, it really does depend on the brands. I think that oftentimes we try to approach things very formulaically, and that discounts any nuance that exists in any given relationship. I mean, every community, every culture is different. If we approach everyone with a cookie cutter approach, then we are really not giving ourselves the time and space to understand the nuance of experiences that people in this space have. And I think that that's why it's really important for even brands to recognize that their experience and their way of approaching impact is going to be different depending on even the communities that they're working in, let alone another brand.
You mentioned that a lot of purpose-driven brands kind of look overseas, and you're right, like the colonialism of today, like the white man's burden of today is like solving someone else's economy of like social economy. And if you're having brands look inward, would you say that you're having them look more local and more communal versus international, or what sort of the line there?
I think it really depends. So one of the things that I think is really important to recognize is, interestingly enough, there's this concept of, well, there's these issues in the developing worlds that we need to solve. And that notion, what it disregards is the fact that many of the issues that communities of color in the global South are having to navigate are caused by the impact of years of extraction and colonialism. So what we consider to be developing is actually communities rebuilding. And so that's really important to recognize. When I'm working with brands, I think it's important for them to also recognize what their impact is within their own communities, and for them to rethink what their relationship is with the communities and artisan groups that they're working with. Oftentimes, there's a very top-down approach, whether we like it or not. That's how we see most of this play out. And so I often work with businesses and think of ways that they can really rethink that relationship, but also recognize that impact has to be community driven. It has to be driven by those communities. And it is the role of a brand that has a certain level of power and privilege to use their power and privilege to pass the mic forward and not necessarily always center themselves.
That is really nice. I feel like a lot of advertising and marketing is focused on, okay, what's your ask? What's the ask? Bring it back in. Everything points in.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very, very different approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
I really like it. What's an impactful moment that you've experienced as a teacher?
Yeah, I think that as an educator, for me, the moments that I appreciate is really sometimes, and I hate to admit that sometimes I'm not able to respond to all emails, but I love receiving emails from people who have taken a workshop or have listened to a podcast episode or read something that I've written that's really made them have a moment of introspection and given them the opportunity to just think about how they talk about their impact and really talk about or communicate impact within their team and externally as well. So I feel like those moments have been the most powerful. I mean, there was one email I received where someone said that they took one of my workshops and the following week they did for a week, they did a whole reorganization of how they approach power in their business with their team. And they all had like a week dedicated to doing different activities that I had talked about in my workshop. And that was amazing. Just hearing those anecdotes, I think is so powerful because it really makes you recognize that sometimes you can just throw information out in the world, but really hearing it stick and actually turn into tangible change is so powerful.
Tell me a little bit about your workshop. What happens? What goes down? Is it like a weekend or is it 2 months, once a week? I'm very curious about your method.
Yeah, so it really depends. I've done open webinars, which has been great, especially when COVID happened. I did a series of webinars for businesses because I felt like it was just a very important time for people to be able to really rethink their business models. So I did that, and that's been great. I also do one-on-one workshops with brands and businesses, which we will take a period of time, and depending on what the project scope is, we'll go through different aspects of impact and make it very hands-on and activity-driven. And that for me is where I like for both. I love webinars; they're just so fun. They're really there's moments of such amazing conversation that takes place when you bring together people from so many different expertise and so many different areas of work during a webinar that is just so powerful, that conversation that happens. And then working directly with teams within the context of one business is also incredibly powerful because you see some of those very tangible changes happen right away. And that to me is just, it gives me so much joy.
What's an example of a business that completely changed their business model? How were they before and then how were they after?
Yeah, I think that one of my favorite examples is a business that used a lot of savior. This is something that's very common as we use a lot of savior language. And I can't give exact names because I do sign non-disclosures with my clients because that is important to me. But, one of the businesses, this is pretty common, is using quite a bit of savior language in your anecdotes and the way you talk about impact as a business. And we basically took every piece of content that they had in their marketing collateral and looked for the most commonly used words. And of course, empowerment was one of them, which is, the word empowerment, often. So the word empowerment often in social impact takes away agency from artisan groups. And so we revisited the way the word empowerment is used. We revisited how the brand was using artisan stories, what kind of stories they were telling. And really, honestly, on the other end, we came out and we were able to take power and redistribute it in a way that's more equitable and that really centers the artisans as not numbers or not anecdotes, but actually people. And I think that that is what was so powerful about that experience.
That is amazing. I can speak from my own experience for having done branding for my own brand and struggling so hard because I'm like, oh, I wanted to all be like, save everything, save the world, save this. And I was like, this is kind of getting tacky. And I just, I think I look now back at the past, it was very cringeworthy. Very cringeworthy. How would you, if you were to put what you do in like a sentence, how would you say that?
I'm decolonizing storytelling.
Okay, that's amazing. Since you've been working in decolonizing storytelling, just what are some surprises that have happened along the way that you've found in maybe the way people used to tell stories?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say there's any surprises because oftentimes the way that stories are told have been happening for years, right? We've seen it in nonprofits, we've seen it in social impact, as oftentimes we capitalize on stories of trauma and grief. And that is not an uncommon experience in the marketing space when it comes to impact-driven brands and organizations. So I wouldn't say that anything has truly surprised me in that sense. I will, however, say I didn't realize how systemic those narratives are to the space, where it's almost become this self-fulfilling cycle of, in order for a brand to feel like they're being transparent and being legitimate, they've got to share those stories because that's what the expectation is. Or in order for an organization to fundraise, they have to share those stories because that provides legitimacy to their work. And so it's been very ingrained into the space. And I think that understanding how systemic this issue is really important because it means that we're not just changing how brands and organizations communicate, but the expectations that customers and donors have of brands and organizations.
Do you notice when it might have really taken a full swing into the marketplace? Do you think that it was in the 90s? I just remember watching TV and these ads would come on for sponsoring a child in Africa. They were horrible. There's the horrible conditions. And it did make you feel, I felt like it was just, it was made to make you feel really terrible. And it did a good thing, but in some ways it wasn't empowering those people. but I saw a lot of it in the 90s. I kind of just wonder when that became just the common way of advertising for ethical brands.
I would say that it has always been part and parcel of the nonprofit sector. I will say the biggest issue with this is that it actually reinforces really harmful stereotypes about communities and cultures. When all you see on TV is poor African kids, then all you assume is that there is only poverty in Africa. And you don't recognize and realize that there is a lot of richness there as well. And that is a problem. That is absolutely an issue. And so when did it really become popular? I would say that it's always been there. The impact space really started out of like, how do we, like, it's like this corporate social responsibility side of things, which has always had this, like, by nature, a level of nonprofit sentiment to it. And that by nature has then seeped into impact branding and marketing and strategies. Is if that works within the nonprofit sector, then to get donations, like, why would we not do it here? And the issue with that model is that those narratives are extremely exploitative, because your intention may be to do great good, but when you keep reinforcing these stereotypical narratives of communities and cultures, you're inevitably doing also great harm.
Let's bring it back into the fashion industry. Where do you see this kind of racism play into, let's say, the manufacturing aspect of the fashion industry?
Yeah, every aspect. There is power at play in every aspect of the fashion industry, from those who are, if you're thinking about a cotton t-shirt, from those who are cultivating the cotton to those who are weaving it and making threads and making the actual t-shirt, to those who are sewing the t-shirt, all of those aspects, to the people who are purchasing and selling and putting their labels on it, right? Every aspect of the fashion industry, there is power at play, and there is someone who is being exploited. I mean, we see this happening in the sustainable fashion space, where individuals are basically told that their job is, and this is not like blatantly, right? But if we think about the way power plays out and the way that individuals navigate through their jobs, we realize that many are essentially told that their work is contingent on the fact that they're willing to provide those stories of quote unquote empowerment, right? Like, we see this play out in every aspect. We see people being exploited at every level, and oftentimes, those who are the factory laborers and factory workers, they are being exploited. Even the people who are factory owners are often being exploited. There's always someone who holds more power in the system. And so we see exploitation and racism in whatever shape and form play out throughout that system of power.
And when you say that for a brand or even an individual to take it on as something that they are going to fix, and they're turning it into a story that is now, it's become exploiting as just a story for someone else's life. Someone else's life is being used to make yourself feel better, to make your brand sell.
Your customers feel better about their purchases.
Your customers feel better. Is there a way to feed into that economy and prop up that economy without exploiting it, even through storytelling? Because I feel like I'm in a twist now. What do you do?
Yeah, I think that we really need to rethink what transparency looks like. And I think that that's the biggest issue is oftentimes there's this feeling that in order to be transparent, we need to share these very personal stories about people's lives. I mean, if you and I, when you did this interview with me, right? You didn't start the interview by asking me to share about my personal life. You didn't say, tell me, like, are you married? Do you have kids? Like, where do you live? Tell me about, like, are you able to comfortably put food on the table? Does your work make you feel like you can actually provide to your family? Those are not questions you would ask me. And if an employer in the United States was to ask their employee about their personal life like that, that would be a lawsuit. But for some reason, we feel that those who are making our products somehow owe us, and therefore their lives are our business. And that's a problem because what we don't realize is those relationships are mutually beneficial. I tell brands this all the time. I was like, if you didn't have the artisans that are helping create your products, you would have no products to sell. You would have no brand. And I think that understanding that those relationships are mutually beneficial is the first stepping stone to really rethinking how we even approach this notion of what is appropriate to share about someone's life and what is not. And I think that that's the biggest thing is we need to recognize that what we have come to accept as part and parcel to any brand marketing strategy in the impact space. It is rooted in power. It's rooted in our understanding of how communities of the global South essentially are a number at the end of the day in our impact report. And that's not okay.
How do you go about claiming the story of sustainability in a healthy way?
What do you mean by
I'm thinking about this, yes. Well, because, for myself, for example, I'm writing this book and also I have a brand, and I was thinking I have a pretty good handle on the sustainability aspect as far as it plays into the planet. But as far as telling people stories without feeling like you're exploiting them, what is there a boundary of permission? Like, what is for a brand to have a healthy relationship with, say your suppliers are in Bangladesh and you're working with a third party to monitor what they're making, what's being made, who's getting paid, how much they're getting paid. This isn't even my brand, so I make everything in the US just to keep things simple. But if it were, and I were trying to tell that story, what would a respectful way to tell that without being, we're saving people in Bangladesh, you're saving people in Bangladesh by buying this. What is an uplifting way to tell that story without it being another empowerment story?
Yeah.
Or do you just not say anything? You just do it?
I think the first thing is recognizing that you're not saving anyone is like the first thing, right? Like you're not saving anyone, your customer is not saving anyone. I want that to be very honestly clear to anyone who's listening. The second thing is, this is a huge question. It's like, what does informed consent look like? If I want to share stories and I have received consent from the manufacturer that I can share this story, well, isn't that enough? And I think that there is a lot to be said about pausing and reflecting on the fact that consent is not permanent. Consent can change. Someone may be comfortable sharing their story in that moment, but they may not be comfortable sharing their story a year from now, let alone a week from now, right? But the issue with storytelling, especially in this space, is once it's out there, it's out there. There's no taking it back. And so I think it's incredibly, incredibly important that we really pause and reflect on what is the purpose of sharing these stories to begin with. Why do we feel that we need to share a person's personal life story in order to feel good about what we're doing? And that, I think, is the biggest thing, is why is it that people have to sacrifice their privacy in order for you to be able to sell your products and make a profit? And the issue often at the end of the day is that oftentimes consent is taken in the lens of, our customers, the people who are buying the products that you're making, want to know more about you. In the person who's making the product, their ears, they're hearing, my job is dependent on me telling you something, because then only people are buying stuff. So we have to really rethink how we even approach consent to begin with.
Yeah, I actually did run into that in, I manufacture in LA, and I wanted to take some pictures in, the facility, and no one was interested. They didn't say no outright, but the attitude was very much like, why? That's a no.
Yeah.
We're cool with that.
Yeah.
We're cool with that.
Yeah.
No one needs to know your face.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's this notion that that's the only way I can prove to my customers that I am doing things right.
That's what was going through my mind. The campaign, I made your clothes.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, I want to be a part of that. So, it's the fashion revolution. I've got this sign. What do you think? And it was like nothing.
Yeah.
Silence.
Yeah, no, it's funny because, you were asking, like, when do you think this happened? And one of the things I often say is, I think Fashion Revolution did amazing work around really opening conversations around transparency. It also then opened this can of worms around taking privacy away from individuals out of this kind of facade of transparency, right? Like, if I can put a face to it, that is all that you need in order to know that I am transparent. And I think that we need to really rethink, when you're an impact-driven business, what is the impact that you're trying to measure? Because that's super important to understand. And then recognizing that your impact is not just on the people that are producing your products. Your impact is in every aspect of your business, right? Diversity has to happen at every aspect of your business. It has to happen within your local communities where you're operating. It has to happen within the team that you have in the global north and your teams in the global south. Like, we have to recognize that it needs to be across your business. It cannot be in just one aspect.
It's so fascinating because it kind of gets wrapped up in this word ethical, ethics and sustainability. But the word ethical also has a complete tie to what is consent, what is the boundaries, that there would even be ethical boundaries in creating ethical products is like, whoa. So I can see how every brand, you have a brand new slate of things to go over with them. Totally makes sense as to why it's so complicated. Yeah, what can business leaders ask themselves before they start trying to just jump into being an ethical business?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that ethical, sustainable businesses can really think about is, what makes me feel that I alone can solve the issues that I'm trying to solve. Because I think you mentioned this a little earlier, and I wanted to say it at that time, but it skipped my mind, is, oftentimes it's this idea of, I'm going to solve this issue, I'm going to save people from this issue, etc. But the first thing I think that people need to really recognize is that any issue, it doesn't matter how small or how big it is, you alone cannot solve it. You must engage with the stakeholders. You must have people who are being impacted by the issue at the decision-making table. So for brands, I want to encourage brands to really think about the diversity of voices that are influencing their approach to impact, because that is super important. Really hearing and listening and having various stakeholders come at the decision-making table is going to only help you create more sustainable change. And if that is the goal of your business, it is to make an impact, to make sustainable change, then you have to have a diversity of voices at that table, because then only can you really think about, is your intention actually going to do great good, or is it potentially going to do more harm?
What can individuals do when they're shopping for brands that are claiming to be sustainable and ethical?
Yeah. I would say that it's really important for even individuals to start thinking about what are questions they can start asking that go beyond, I just want to know who made my clothes. Because just knowing who made your clothes is not good enough. You need to really think about, what does accountability look like? And oftentimes, in what ways are the brands that we are supporting really actually practicing accountability? And that comes in various shapes and forms, right? That comes in the design process as well. Oftentimes, brands will appropriate designs and techniques from cultures and claim them as their own and profit off of them. And as consumers, we have the opportunity to say that we will not support that and not buy products when brands are potentially doing harm by appropriating from the cultures of marginalized groups. And I think that's a great place for many individuals to start. In the fashion industry, when we talk about design, we often see racism play out in the form of shaping the narrative around who the designer is versus who is the maker. And I think that oftentimes what people don't realize is the people who are actually creating the products are truly the designers. They are the owners of often the techniques that are used within the fashion industry. And so I think it's so important that we rethink who the designer is in these conversations. Appropriation is a huge issue in the fashion industry. That is the number one way we see racism being played out in the design space. And appropriation comes in the shape of not recognizing the spiritual connection of certain garments. For example, the kimono is something that we see brands selling right and left, but has a very personal connection to the Japanese community. And ignoring that and selling a kimono, which can be very sacred, is problematic. I see it play out within South Asian culture. We see different aspects of even Indian culture as a broad brushstroke. There's many subcultures in India, but Indian culture as a broad brushstroke being appropriated throughout the fashion space. And so really taking a moment to pause and recognize the great harm that that does is important. You know, years ago, I identify as Sikh. I am Punjabi by culture, Sikh by faith. And one of the articles of faith in Sikhism is the turban, or we call it the pagadi or the star. And after 9/11, many Sikh men and Sikh women who wear turbans were victims of hate crimes. And years later, Gucci decided to do a fashion show where all the models were wearing turbans that looked just like our, very sacred article of faith and selling them on like a Nordstrom website for hundreds of dollars, profiting off of a item that is so sacred, but also has been a reason that our community has been victim to hate. And now the thing about appropriation is that communities that own or that oftentimes these articles are sacred to are often at the receiving end of prejudice. But then when you have people with power that are able to wear those same exact items, they are seen as worldly and they're seen as woke or whatever you want to call it. And that's the problem about appropriation, is that it's about power and it's about profit. Who's profiting? Definitely not the community that has been suffering as a result of their own culture and their own heritage and their own items and symbols and so forth. And so appropriation, I would say, is one of the biggest ways we see racism play out in the design space.
Thank you so much for all of the effort that you've put into thinking about this and creating a way to communicate with brands and sort of set this straight. I have learned so much through you today, and I have a lot to think about. So I might even send you some emails afterward, because I'm like, oh, what about this? Oh, what about this?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm really, really grateful. I would love to know how our audience can connect with you.
Yeah,
sure. Instagram or your website.
Yeah, you can visit me on artofcitizenry.com, or you can reach out to me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Manpreet Kalra.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And yeah.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
A huge thank you again to Manpreet for challenging the way we think about what is ethical for everyone involved in ethical branding. I, for one, have learned something. Again, you can find her on Instagram at Manpreet Kalra, and that is at ManpreetKalra, or at her consulting website, and that's at artofcitizenry.com.
Hey, this is Andrea in Cedar City. ES Now is a Holding Court production and is written and produced by Courtney Barriger. Music is by Parker Ainsworth. Fact-checked by Justin Howard. And a special thanks to Alexandra Shuck.